This wasn't just a method of execution, it was a public performance of agony. The Catherine wheel wasn't designed to just kill a person. It was designed to shatter their body, bone by bone, in front of a crowd. If you think modern justice can be harsh, just wait until you hear how punishments were doled out in medieval times. The device, also known as the breaking wheel, was saved for the most severe crimes, representing a sentence of almost unimaginable pain and public humiliation. It was used across Europe for centuries, a terrifying symbol of ultimate punishment, designed not just to end a life, but to make an absolute spectacle of the condemned. The goal was simple: inflict the maximum amount of pain for the longest possible time, turning the human body into a broken warning for all to see. This tool of state-sanctioned terror was a cornerstone of justice in places like France and the Holy Roman Empire for crimes considered so heinous that a quick death was just too merciful. But to truly understand this horrific instrument, we have to look at its mechanics, its cultural impact, and the bizarre story of how it got its name. A story that starts not with a criminal, but with a saint. So, how does an instrument of pure, horrifying torture get named after a Christian saint? The answer is tangled in the legend of Catherine of Alexandria, a brilliant and devout noblewoman from the early 4th century. The story goes that Catherine was a scholar of incredible intellect who converted to Christianity as a teenager. Her faith was so strong that she openly challenged the Roman Emperor Maxentius, debating and defeating his most esteemed pagan philosophers. Furious at her victory and her refusal to renounce her faith, Maxentius condemned her to a horrific death on a new, monstrous machine. A large wheel, supposedly studded with sharp spikes, built to slowly tear her apart. Catherine was brought before the device, but as the legend claims, the moment she touched it, the wheel miraculously shattered. This was seen as an act of divine intervention. Thwarted, the emperor ordered her to be beheaded instead. After her execution, it's said that milk, not blood, flowed from her body, another piece of the incredible legend. This story cemented Catherine's status as a martyr and one of Christianity's most beloved saints. The broken wheel became her symbol, an icon you can see in countless paintings and statues. And so, the execution device itself, the very thing meant to destroy her, became known as the Catherine wheel. This strange twist of fate turned a tool of brutal punishment into a potent religious symbol, representing faith's power to endure anything. From then on, every criminal sentenced to die on the wheel was subjected to a punishment ironically named for the woman who conquered it. The legend is one of miracles, but the reality of the Catherine wheel was one of methodical, almost scientific brutality. You could even call it an engineering marvel of pain. The device was typically a large wooden wagon wheel, sometimes reinforced with an iron rim. Its use was a carefully choreographed procedure designed to systematically destroy a human body while keeping the victim alive for as long as possible. The process varied, but it often began with the condemned being taken to a public scaffold and stripped naked, adding a layer of deep humiliation to the physical torment. In one common method, the victim was tied to the ground, their limbs stretched out over pieces of wood. The executioner, wielding a heavy iron bar or the wheel itself, would then begin deliberately breaking their bones. They would strike each limb a set number of times, shattering shins, femurs, and arms, with the sound of snapping bones echoing through the crowd. In another variation, the victim was tied directly to the wheel, their arms and legs outstretched along the spokes. The executioner would use an iron cudgel to break the limbs between the gaps. Sometimes the wheel was slowly revolved, so the victim could never anticipate where the next agonizing blow would land. The goal of this first stage wasn't death, but pure torture. The pain would have been indescribable, a wave of shock, agony, and the terror of knowing it was far from over. There were two main classes of this execution, reflecting a grim spectrum of mercy. The first, considered more lenient, was execution from the top down. Here, the executioner would deliver the first blows to the neck or chest, a so-called coup de grâce, or blow of mercy, causing a relatively swift death. The subsequent breaking of the limbs was purely a posthumous display for the crowd. But for those convicted of the most heinous crimes, the sentence was from the bottom up. This was the true horror of the wheel. The executioner would start at the feet and methodically work their way up, ensuring the victim remained conscious through hours of torment. Death would come slowly, from shock, blood loss, or dehydration, but only after every major bone in their limbs had been systematically shattered. The ordeal didn't end with the breaking of the body. The second stage transformed the victim into a public warning. After the bones were broken, the executioner would weave the victim's now unnervingly pliable limbs through the spokes of the wheel. With the body grotesquely entwined, the wheel was hoisted onto a tall pole, leaving the broken, mangled victim on display for the entire town to see. This wasn't a private affair. It was a major social event. Crowds would gather, drawn by a grim mix of fear, morbid curiosity, and what they saw as communal justice. These public executions were a raw and visceral deterrent, a clear message from the authorities about the price of defying the law. Seeing a human body broken and displayed so horrifically was a form of psychological warfare designed to instill terror and enforce compliance. For the victim, if they were still alive, this final phase was perhaps the cruelest. Exposed to the elements, suffering from unimaginable pain and thirst, they would hang there, sometimes for hours, sometimes for days. One account from 1348 tells of a man who survived on the wheel for 4 days and nights. In another case, the 16th century German serial killer, Peter Niers, was subjected to 42 blows over 2 days before he finally died. Most victims, however, would die from shock and dehydration, sometimes preyed upon by scavenger birds while still alive. One can only imagine the psychological impact this had on everyone involved. For the crowds, it was a complex mix of horror and morbid entertainment. For the authorities, it was the ultimate demonstration of power. It's plausible that for the executioners themselves, participating in such events could lead to their own lasting trauma, a haunting burden they would carry for the rest of their lives. The Catherine wheel was more than an execution. It was a carefully staged ritual of state power, designed to leave an indelible scar on the collective memory of all who witnessed it. The history of punishment is filled with methods designed to inflict pain, but the Catherine wheel stands in a category of its own for its calculated cruelty. It represents a time when justice wasn't just about retribution, but about public theatrical terror. If you find these dives into the darker chapters of history fascinating, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss another story they didn't teach you in school. The breaking wheel wasn't confined to one dark corner of history. Its use spanned from antiquity into the early modern era. It became a prominent method of execution throughout the Middle Ages, particularly in the Holy Roman Empire and France. In the Holy Roman Empire, it was reserved for severe crimes that disrupted social order, like aggravated murder or treason. In France, it was also used for capital crimes. While its use was overwhelmingly European, there are a few recorded instances of it being used in the French colonies of North America, primarily as a punishment for enslaved people after revolts. The last known execution by the wheel occurred in Prussia in 1841, marking the end of a long and bloody era. The decline of the Catherine wheel was a gradual process, driven by the shifting philosophies of the 18th century Enlightenment. As thinkers questioned the nature of justice and human rights, the concept of such extreme public torture began to look less like a tool of the state and more like barbaric cruelty. The idea that punishment should be swift and serve justice rather than be a prolonged spectacle started to take hold. Nations began to abolish the wheel, with Bavaria outlawing it in 1813 in favor of methods considered more humane, like hanging or the guillotine. Its final use in Prussia signaled that its time had finally passed. The wheel was officially deemed too cruel, even for the worst of criminals. The Catherine wheel holds a uniquely grim place in human history. It was more than a tool. It was a complex symbol of power, religion, and terror. It represented a society where justice was performed on the body, a public theater where the state's authority was written in shattered bones and drawn-out agony. Its legacy is twofold. On one hand, it's forever linked to the miraculous legend of Saint Catherine of Alexandria, a story of faith triumphing over brutality. On the other, it stands as a chilling testament to the calculated cruelty humans are capable of in the name of law and order. The slow abandonment of the wheel marks a major shift in our understanding of justice, moving away from public spectacle and toward a system that, at least in theory, punishes the guilty without resorting to gratuitous torture. It forces us to reflect on how societies define crime and punishment, and how far we've come from a time when a broken body on a wheel was considered a legitimate act of the state. What do you think this brutal chapter of history teaches us about justice today? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.